In this video, we're going to make it so that when we swing our sword and we hit our character, it's going to basically stay in its idle position. You can see here that I hit the enemy and now it's stuck in the walk cycle. It should be back to idle. In order to control this logic, it needs to know what its proper animation should be, and we need to create that. Essentially what we want to do is basically say if in combat mode, so if it's in combat, then we're going to say transition to idle or loop idle, and if you're not in combat, then walk. So to easily do this, what we can do here is we can create a new behavior parameter inside of our animator. So let's create a new parameter, and let's create a bool instead of a trigger. This is going to be a bool, and let's call it InCombat. Now that we have that, let's look at the logic here. We trigger our hit animation. Once the hit animation plays, it's instantly going to go back to idle. Now what happens once it's in idle? When should it go back to its walking state? Well, it should go back to walking if InCombat is false. So if it's not in combat, it's going to go walking. It's going to go to the walk animation, and if it is in combat, it's going to loop its idle. Simply, let's save this and test it out, and it should work. At the start of the game, it's not in combat. And here, if we walk up to it, right here, we're going to say InCombat is true. Make sure we check that. And once it starts walking again, okay, so you can see here that by setting InCombat is true, it's now permanently in idle. And that's exactly the behavior we want. What we need to do now, though, is basically trigger this. So we need to now trigger this, where we need to set this bool through the inspector, or I'm sorry, through our code. So let's open up our script and take a look at the logic for this. Let's stop Unity and let's open up our skeleton script. Within our skeleton script, we have our damage code here. We can stop the movement, and now what we need to do is we need to say, once you're hit, we now need to say, hey, grab the animator component. We're going to say anim, and then .set bool. And that's going to allow us to say InCombat. And then what's the value? Well, if we just call this damage function, then InCombat is now set to true. If we save this, head back into Unity, let the code compile, and let's run our game. We should now see that we can attack the skeleton. It's going to play its hit, and then it's going to be stuck in idle forever. What we're going to need to do next is then create the ability for it to go back into walking based on us walking away from the enemy. So let's move over here. I'm going to attack it. And here we go, trigger, and now it's stuck in idle. What it needs to do now is calculate the distance between us and it, and basically say, hey, if you're no longer in range, then I can go back to doing what I usually do, which is just walking. So we'll go ahead and create that logic in the next video.